move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3036 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar number 317, H.R. 3036, a bill to designate the National September 11th Memorial located at the World Trade Center site in New York City, New York, as a national memorial and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. MacArthur, and the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
I yield to myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I was working in New York City in the fall of 2001 when terrorists tore a hole in our skyline and nearly 3,000 Americans lost their lives. Like many others, I lost people that I knew. And for many, they lost their dearest loved ones, their soulmate, mother, father, brother, sister, children, child, friend. All of us were moved by stories of heroism that followed that event. Hundreds of firefighters and police and other first responders who gave their own lives to save others. And in the months that followed, I remember coming around that site every morning as I went to work because I couldn't take the tunnel anymore. It was closed. And I would take the ferry from New York to New Jersey, and we would come around the tip of Manhattan. And every morning, as we passed the Trade Center site, a hush would fall on that ferry boat. And people would ponder what happened there. And that went on as autumn turned into winter and winter turned into spring, month after month, as we watched the seemingly endless restoration of that tragic site. Mr. Speaker, on September 11th, 2011, 10 years later, the memorial, the World Trade Center Memorial, opened. And it was erected to remember those who fell, to recognize the endurance of the survivors, to honor the bravery of those who risked their lives and often lost their lives to save others, and above all, to remember the power of our free nation to overcome evil with good. It stands as a reminder to every generation that we must never forget and we must never falter. Mr. Speaker, private citizens with deep concern erected that memorial, and I applaud them for their good work. But now it is our part to preserve and protect this hallowed ground and to answer this national tragedy with national support. The 9/11 Memorial at the World Trade Center Act recognizes this site as a national memorial. It provides for funding for security and operations. I want to thank the many who have endorsed this bill. 82 members of this chamber have co-sponsored it. Police organizations have gotten behind it, including the National Association of Police Organizations and the Fraternal Order of Police. Veterans organizations, including the Iraq and Afghanistan Vets of America, Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey, and Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York, and most importantly, nearly a dozen family and friend support groups of those that were most deeply impacted by 9/11. Private donors, concerned citizens have done their part at this site, and they continue to. But now it is our solemn duty, I believe, to honor the fallen and to protect the living. I urge my colleagues to pass the National 9/11 Memorial at the World Trade Center Act, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill, as we know, designates the 9/11 Memorial at the World Trade Center as the National September 11th Memorial and authorizes a grant program of up to $25 million per year for the next 7 years to support the operation and the maintenance of the memorial. The bill was amended at markup to make the grant program available to other September 11th memorials located in the United States. Money for the grant program will be subject to appropriation and come out of the overall budget of the Department of Interior. I want to thank and congratulate my colleague from New York, Representative Nadler. As the lead Democratic co-sponsor, he has diligently guided this bill through the legislative process, and it's because of his hard work and advocacy that it has come this far. September 11th both rattled and united this country like few other events in our history. We still live with the repercussions, and the memorial is a fitting tribute and a solemn reminder. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The
Mr.
gentleman
Speaker,
from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Calvert.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the National 9/11 Memorial in the World Trade Center. The events of September 11th continue to stir emotions for Americans when we think about that day's tragic losses, remarkable acts of bravery, and the stark reminders that life is precious and evil is real. As a nation, we have pledged never forget. What happened on September 11th, and today, by passing this legislation, we can put actions behind that sentiment. 2016 marks the 75th anniversary of Pearl Harbor and the 15th anniversary of 9/11. Just as the USS Arizona provides a place for future generations to understand where, and more importantly, how and why we were attacked in 1941, the 9/11 Memorial gives Americans a place to understand the tragedy of that day and ongoing sacrifices of the United States Armed Forces. Indeed, December 7th and September 11th are now two dates that will live in infamy. I want to thank my colleague, Tom MacArthur, for introducing this legislation, and I want to thank everyone from the National September 11th Memorial for all their hard work. I've been to the memorial and I've felt the incredibly emotional effect it has on each visitor. Unfortunately, many of our enemies see this as a symbol of our nation's strength and resolve it as a target, and as such, the memorial requires a high level of security in order to keep over 6 million annual visitors safe. This legislation ensures the memorial will receive the support it needs to provide a safe experience for every visitor that passes through, whether they be His Holiness Pope Francis or a young school child not yet born on September 11, 2001. I'd like to take a moment and recognize a very special person, Rob O'Neill, a former member of SEAL Team 6, is best known for his actions in the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. The 9/11 Memorial has a special place in his heart and has been a strong advocate for this bill. He told me others that the site is important to him and his fellow special operators. It helps signify the cause for which they were fighting. In fact, the shirt that he wore on the mission is on display at the museum, along with other artifacts of 9/11. In many years since chronicling how Americans have pulled together to support each other, secure our nation, and rededicate ourselves to liberty and justice, so I thank Mr. O'Neill for his service and for his sacrifice. I once again want to convey my support for the bill, encourage all my colleagues to pass the National 9/11 Memorial at the World Trade Center Act. I also would like to thank Tricia Evans and Ian Foley on my staff for their hard work on this bill. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you. I would be remiss if I did not extend to Representative MacArthur our appreciation for your leadership in bringing this bill to this point as well. Thank you. At this point, Mr. Speaker, let me yield as much time as he may consume to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, and thank him for his leadership and hard work in getting this bill to this point. With that, I yield to Mr. Nadler.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, more than 14 years ago, 2 jet planes were deliberately crashed into the World Trade Center, killing thousands of innocent people. A third plane slammed into the Pentagon, and a fourth plane likely destined for this very Capitol complex in which we now stand, was brought down by a group of courageous passengers in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. As I do today, I represented Ground Zero, the World Trade Center area, on September 11, 2001. In the hours immediately after the attack, I left Washington and took the last train back to my home in New York. I'll never forget the moment I first saw where the ravaged skyline of lower Manhattan from the train windows. Normally, going in the train between Philadelphia and New York, I would look to see the first glimpse I could catch of the Twin Towers. Now what you could see was not the Twin Towers, but long, tall, billowing clouds of smoke going straight up and then stretching down the Jersey shore. The Twin Towers had been replaced by the brutal glow of raging fires and black billowing smoke. The train that left at 10 o'clock arrived at 6 p.m. We'd been held up in Baltimore while they walked the tracks looking for bombs. Coming out of Penn Station at 6 o'clock was like a scene from the movie On the Beach, for those who remember that movie. Nothing was moving. The city at 33rd Street and 8th Avenue seemed completely empty. No people, no cars, no buses, nothing moving, as if it were completely depopulated. When I went down to I had to call a friend to come pick me up to get home. When I went down to the World Trade Center the next morning, the scene was absolutely horrible. Fire, smoke, debris, twisted metal, human remains. Total devastation. And yet, even then, there were signs of hope. Firefighters, police, emergency medical technicians, iron workers, construction workers of all types rushed to Ground Zero from around the country to offer their help. Message of support and comfort flooded in from all 50 states. The American people united and determined to help New York get back on its feet. The attack may have occurred in my district, but it was an attack on our nation as a whole, and we all recognize that. In the years since the attacks, America has acted as a nation to help rebuild New York and support the responders, survivors, and families of the victims. Last year, Congress reauthorized the James Adroga 9/11 Health and Compensation Act to provide health care and support to 33,000 responders and survivors who now live in all 50 states and 429 congressional districts. By passing a permanent health program and reauthorizing the Victims' Compensation Fund, Congress provided peace of mind for tens of thousands of brave Americans. In addition to making our responders and survivors whole, Congress invested billions of dollars to help rebuild Lower Manhattan. One World Trade Center now fills the hole left in our skyline when the towers fell. And businesses shuttered after the attack are reopened and thriving. In what was once the shadow of the towers, there now stands a comprehensive museum dedicated to sharing the stories of September 11th and the bravery of those who risked everything to protect their fellow Americans that day and the days following. And in place of the smoking hole that Congressman MacArthur and I saw day after day in Lower Manhattan, there now exists a somber and inspiring memorial. It is a site of remembrance and hope, a place for every American to come and reflect on what happened that September morning and to renew our promise to never forget the events of that day. It is a national memorial for a national tragedy. That is why I am pleased to co-sponsor the legislation introduced by my colleague from New Jersey to provide federal recognition and support for the memorial. This legislation will help ensure the memorial continues to provide a sacred and inspiring spot for generations to come. I appreciate the bipartisan support of the members of the Natural Resources Committee and the House leadership in bringing the bill to the floor today. I look forward to working with my colleagues on the House Appropriations Committee every year to ensure that the National 9/11 Memorial receives appropriate levels of funding. I will also work with my colleagues to maintain open communications with the Department of the Interior to ensure the money is spent wisely and achieves our shared goal of ensuring the memorial remains a spot of reflection and peace accessible to millions of visitors every day. I urge my colleagues to support this bill and provide the recognition and support this memorial deserves. I thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back.
I also want
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
I also want to acknowledge Representative Nadler and thank him for his support in this process. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Donovan.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, This September 11th, our country suffered, this is 15 years ago, this September 11th, our country suffered the most deadly and devastating attack since its birth. Terrorists chose the Twin Towers because they stood proud and they stood tall. They stood as symbols of the raw power of a people free to pursue their dreams, to live their values, and to practice their faith. When the towers fell, they took Americans from every corner of our nation. And when the president stood atop of a fire engine and spoke through a bullhorn consoling a broken nation, he spoke to every man, woman, and child in our United States, suffering and saddened by an unimaginable act of hate. Heroes from all over the country came to Lower Manhattan to sift through the rubble and pick up the pieces. It was a sight of national tragedy, a sight of national heroism, and it must also be a site of a national memorial. It's only fitting that the 9/11 Memorial receive proper funding, just like every other national memorial. It's sacred ground and must be maintained accordingly. Also, annual security cost runs into the millions of dollars as the site remains a top terrorist target. Mr. Speaker, terrorists may have attacked our country at 3 locations that day, but they also attacked the spirit inside all of us. I encourage every member of this body to vote for this legislation and to visit the 9/11 Memorial and Museum to see what myself and Representative Nadler see every day. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. Thank you, Representative MacArthur, for introducing this legislation. And thank you again and always to the heroes of that fateful day. I yield the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you. And let me yield at this point, Mr. Speaker, to all the time that the gentleman may consume. Gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pasquarello, to speak on the legislation.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of H.R. 3036, the National 9/11 Memorial at the World Trade Center Act. It was introduced by my friends, Congressman MacArthur and Jerry Nadler, 2 sentinels of Americans' liberty and freedom. President Bush traveled to the site with Democrats and Republicans. I have never seen, in my experience here, no other effort close to it of how we were united. We accomplished so much when we were united. And we learned to respect each other even more. On that day, our lives, our country, and the world changed forever. And in the aftermath, Americans came together for a common purpose: to rescue, to rebuild, and remember those we lost. Friends, neighbors, many of them. They were from all faiths, all persuasions. This memorial and the museum at the World Trade Center were constructed so that we never forget those brothers and sisters, children and parents, cousins and colleagues. We called them that at the time, and yet the further we get from 9/11, we very seldom refer to sisters and brothers except for our relatives. And our brave first responders that perished during one of the darkest moments in our nation's history. Ensuring this memorial site will be here for years to come will give millions of people around the world the opportunity to pay tribute to those lost, and we find inspiration in how our nation recovered. As a proud supporter of our National Park Service, I know they will make sure the site remains a sacred place of healing and of hope as a national memorial As a result, Mr. Speaker, I urge swift passage of H.R. 3036 to solidify the memorial standing, to honor the memories of those we lost, to ensure future generations can learn about that tragic day. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Can I inquire how much time we have remaining, please?
11.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Stefanik.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 3036, the 9/11 National Memorial Act. I want to thank my colleague, Mr. MacArthur, for his leadership on this incredibly important issue. 15 years ago, on September 11th, every American remembers where they were when this horrifying news broke of these terrorist attacks. Mr. Speaker, as the youngest member currently serving in Congress, I was in high school English class when the horrible news was shared with my classmates from our teacher. I remember my schoolmates crying who couldn't get a hold of their older siblings, of their aunts and uncles, of their cousins who worked in the World Trade Centers. On that horrifying day where terrorists attacked our nation, we also saw true acts of heroism. As the workers of the World Trade Center were running out to escape, our first responders were running up the stairs to save their fellow Americans. Strangers helped fellow strangers escape the buildings. New Yorkers helped others walk miles home to get to their families. New Yorkers will never forget the horrifying attacks. This nation will never forget these horrifying attacks. The 9/11 Memorial is truly hallowed ground, and I urge all of my colleagues to vote yes on this legislation. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you. And we have no further speakers, and just want to say that urge quick passage of this legislation. This legislation, this 9/11 National Memorial, no matter what corner of this great nation of ours we're from, we have a shared legacy here. And that shared legacy is about sacrifice, heroism, and indeed loss as well. We have a shared future in this memorial about determination, resilience, and the very nature of this nation to be hopeful and to look forward. And to one another, we have a shared responsibility. This memorial will remind us of that, keep that thought very much alive in all of us. And again, let me congratulate and thank the sponsors of the legislation, Mr. Nadler, Mr. MacArthur, for their fine work and for bringing this before us today. And with that, I yield back the remainder of our time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the remarks of my colleagues. And events like 9/11 and the world that it has brought us into demands that we come together. And I'm glad that we've done that on this bill. We've come together to honor the fallen, to protect the living, and I urge my colleagues to join in making this the voice of this chamber as we vote, and I yield back.
Back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Bill H.R. 3036? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. As amended, two-thirds of the being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed without objection. The motion is reconsidered, is laid on the table.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise, remain standing until counted. Sufficient number have risen. The yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings of this question will be postponed.